Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribharadhare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribharadhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribharadhare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribharadhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Mishnabad, Parnamahang, Super Project Charity, Status Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki, Shri Giri Govardhan Ki, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Sankirtan Yagya Ki, Go Premanande. All glories to their Somo devotees, all glories to their Somo devotees, all glories to their Somo devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. What is the verse number? It's 423, right? 37. Right, okay. All right, thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 23, Chapter 23. Maharaj Prithu is going back home, verse 37. Muktanya Sango Bhagavate Amalam Bhaktim Udvahan Vainyasya Charitam Punyam Srinuyach Travayet Patet Muktanya Sango Bhagavati Amalam Bhaktim Udvahan Vainyasya Charitam Punyam Srinuyach Travayet Pater Patet Muktanya Sango Bhagavati Amalam Bhaktim Udvahan Vainyasya Charitam Punyam Srinuyach Travayet Patet Muktanya Sango Bhagavati Amalam Bhaktim Udvahan Vainyasya Charitam Punyam Srinuyach Travayet Patet Mukta anya sangha, being freed from all material contamination. Bhagavati, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Amalam, unalloyed, bhaktim, devotional service. Udvahan, carrying out. Vainyasya, of the son of Maharaj Vena. Charitam, character. Punyam, pious. Shrinuyat, must hear. Shravayet, must induce others to hear. Patet, and go on reading. Translation: a pure devotee who is executing the different processes of devotional service may be situated in the transcendental position, being completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. But even he, while discharging devotional service, must hear, read, and induce others to hear about the character and life of Prithu Maharaj. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There is a type of neophyte devotee who's very anxious to hear about the pastimes of the Lord, especially the Rasa Leela chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam. Such a devotee should know by this instruction that the pastimes of Prithu Maharaj are non-different from the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. An ideal king, Prithu Maharaj exhibited all talents in showing how to rule the citizens, how to educate them, how to develop the state economically, how to fight enemies, how to perform great sacrifices, yagyas, etc. Thus it is recommended for the sahajya, or the neophyte devotee, to hear, chant, and get others to hear about the activities of Prithu Maharaj. Even though one may think himself to be in the transcendental position of advanced devotional service. Muktanya Sango Bhagavati Amalam Bhaktim Udvahan Vainyasya Charitam Punyam Shunuyach Travayet Patet. A pure devotee who is executing the different processes of devotional service may be situated in the transcendental position, being completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. But even he, while discharging devotional service, must hear, read, and induce others to hear about the character and life of Prithu Maharaj. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhupya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yes, so it's a very interesting subject that you do get devotees. They are devotees, but they are not properly situated as devotees, and they don't have proper guidance as devotees. So they, in one way or another, there are different ways in which it could happen, they become aware that to hear about the pastimes of the Lord is just very important, which is true. Is definitely true. and even to hear particularly the Rasa Leela chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam is the highest part of hearing about the pastimes of the Lord, or those are the highest pastimes of the Lord, and hearing about them is the highest form of hearing, which is also, there's truth in that. There's truth in that, but it's not just like a sort of blanket rule, just under all circumstances, at all places, at all times, and independent of who is the person or the devotee in question, or the position of whom is, or at least these activities should be done by. That is something else. That is not so simple at all. It's just not so simple at all. Even though, on a certain level, these points, hearing about the pastimes, and the pastimes which are the most elevated are the Rasa Leela pastimes, and then conclusion that, well, we must hear about these pastimes, or even we must particularly hear about these pastimes, or as is the case with some, that we must only hear about these pastimes because they are so, you could say, uniquely special. This is misunderstanding. Just like, well, in logic, technical logic, there are different, what do they call them, syllogisms. They're stages of the development of logical argument leading to a logical conclusion, but the stages may not be sort of complete, and therefore, because they're not complete, the conclusion is not complete. So an example which is given is that, well, it's definitely an example which is given. In England, there's a type of bird called a robin, and I don't think we have them here. I don't know so much about our birds here, but anyway, a robin is a bird. Robins have red breasts. Therefore, all birds have red breasts. This is a syllogism, step-by-step form of logic. How does that sound? That sound good? You agree with that? Not? Oh, really? Because there's something wrong with it. Yes. So it is, even though it's true that the robin is a bird, and that all robins have red breasts or chests sort of thing, and therefore the conclusion, but then there's a gap, that the conclusion supposedly is that all birds have red breasts. Now, we are, I think, well enough aware that definitely all birds do not have red breasts, so there's a gap in the logic. So the logic here is, hearing about the pastimes of the Lord is the most important thing. Well, shall we just say, a very important thing. Hearing about the pastimes of the Lord is a very important thing, correct. The Rasa Leela pastimes of the Lord described in Srimad Bhagavatam are the highest pastimes. Check, that's also correct. Therefore, we, as devotees, must particularly hear about the Rasa Leela pastimes of the Lord. There's a gap in the logic, and the gap is that it depends on who is the devotee being referred to, because not all devotees are equal. In a certain sense, I mean, there's a type of equality, but it's limited. Like typically, an example which Prabhupada gives, in fact, is that the pujari who's offering the arati on the altar, and while he or she is doing that, another devotee is cleaning the floor of the temple. So the statement which is given, which Prabhupada gave, is that the pujari must not think that, look at me, I'm a very advanced devotee, and this devotee just cleaning the floor is, on a much lower level. In a certain sense, there's truth in it, because in order to be able to go on the altar and worship the deities, certain amount of advancement has to be there and sort of be certified as being there. Whereas to just clean the floor, so that anyone can do that in a sense. And so, in that sense, there is not equality. But in another sense, that service, this is service, that is service, it's all service, and it's all beneficial. That point is also there, but it's not just absolutely like that under all circumstances. That just because it's devotional service and you are doing devotional service and he or she and someone else is doing devotional service, that they're all equal in terms of devotional service. Because there is devotional service and there is devotional service. There are devotees and there are devotees. Yes, so it is more, one should be careful to avoid impersonal ideas or, ideas which may have truth in them in Krishna consciousness as being absolutely true under all circumstances. And this is the case here. For someone, well, anyway, the basic point is here that the verse itself is saying that if you're a devotee, if you're an advanced devotee, or if you're any devotee ultimately, then you should encourage people to hear about Prithu Maharaj. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki Jai. Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Yes, so every devotee, or at least every devotee, must be encouraged to hear, chant, and get others to hear about and chant about the activities of Prithu Maharaj, because they're just so valuable. But the thing is that Prithu Maharaj did not have a rasa dance. He was in a different sort of position in life. So the idea that because the rasa dance and the conjugal pastimes of Krishna are the highest, that you just must listen to them, whoever you are and whatever your level may be, that is not correct. And so therefore the idea of encouraging people to hear about those pastimes, irrespective of their particular levels in Krishna consciousness, is inaccurate. Better for them to hear some other things. Yes. This is a very important part of Krishna consciousness, and it's a fact, it's actually a fact, that some devotees who were members of Prabhupada's ISKCON, but who got encouraged by one means or another to to not remain within Prabhupada's ISKCON, but to join another group, because the other group was focusing in that way on the conjugal pastimes, and that's the highest, and other things are lower. The fact that the conjugal pastimes of Lord Krishna are the highest of all his pastimes, to some people would indicate that other pastimes and just other sub-aspects of Krishna consciousness are automatically of lesser importance. But it's not really true. Certainly on the absolute platform it's not true. But in terms of relevancy and qualification of the hearer, of the devotee, well, it may be that focusing on those, even though they are the highest pastimes, focusing on them for a devotee who's not ready may actually be detrimental. Not just like not relevant, but actually detrimental, because those pastimes have aspects which may, if a person is still really attached on the bodily platform, and specifically attached to the male-female types of relationships, they may find those pastimes actually encourage the manifestation of those types of desires that they have within themselves, which otherwise the practice of Krishna consciousness under proper supervision and guidance will help you overcome. But when you're not properly guided, but you're guided to focus on those pastimes because of their special nature, but you're not ready, then it becomes detrimental, it becomes anartha. Anartha in a very serious sense of anartha. Artha, of course, means useful. Anartha means not useful or useless. But then there's another level of anartha, which is not just useless, but is detrimental. So it's a very important part of Krishna consciousness. And here, well, Prabhupada, in general, Prabhupada would emphasize, like, for example, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, including the descriptions of the processes of creation and so many other things which are there in Srimad Bhagavatam, but giving proper attention to them and not just becoming focused in some sort of specialized way in this regard in terms of the conjugal pastimes of the Lord. So Prabhupada, actually, there's a place where Prabhupada is discussing with the devotee in the sense that, well, actually the devotee is talking about the pastimes of Krishna killing demons as opposed to the pastimes of Krishna in his relationships with the gopis. And Prabhupada makes the point that the pastimes of Krishna killing the demons are no less important and valuable than the pastimes of the conjugal pastimes of Krishna. And of course he's indicating, particularly for us, particularly for those who are not on very high levels of Krishna consciousness. So we find that, for example, these types of devotees who have encouraged other devotees to give up following Krishna consciousness as Prabhupada gave it, to a sort of methodology of focusing on these types of pastimes, confidential conjugal pastimes, they also say that, well, Krishna in Dwaraka, it's Krishna. It's transcendental, but it's not conjugal like the pastimes in the conjugal leelas. And this sort of idea is just really not appreciated. Really not appreciated. So this is a very important point. We have to, Prabhupada wanted all of us to absorb ourselves completely in Srimad Bhagavatam, everything which is there in Srimad Bhagavatam, all the different avatars, their pastimes, the different lessons we can learn. Like nowadays, as I'm sure you're all not just well aware, but extremely well aware, there's this film circulating about Lord Nrsingadev. Did you all see it? Yes. Okay. Well, it's, our devotees, one devotee, Gauranga Das, who you may not know personally, or some of you may, but he's a GBC member, actually. And he's just a very, very good devotee. Just absolutely one of the very best and most knowledgeable and intelligent. He was involved in the making of it and gave guidance to, I forget the name of the person, but the person who was the main person in putting it together. And that guidance, the person putting it together, mainly used, but not entirely, but mainly he did. And if you watch it, you can see, oh yes, this is actually authentic, but then some other things you see, well, a little bit, for dramatic effect. Yes. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's really important to get proper guidance. Otherwise, one ends up sort of cheating oneself effectively. So the thing is, like with Lord Nrsingadev, there is this vital point in Krishna consciousness to really become convinced about, appreciate and understand and become convinced about, and that is that Krishna does protect his devotees. He definitely does. And he protected Prahlad in all sorts of ways which were, you could say, the types of ways of being protected which the people in general have in their minds of what it means to be protected by the Lord. He was physically protected from being killed in all sorts of ways, even from being killed in ways which normally you could never escape being killed. But he was saved. And this is generally what people think is what being protected by the Lord means. That in these types of situations where you would normally particularly be killed, but you won't be killed because the Lord intervenes. But actually being protected by the Lord does not necessarily mean that. That was there in the case of Prahlad, because on one point at least, Prahlad is extremely elevated, but then it was also the will of the Lord that he be protected in those particular ways. But sometimes being protected by the Lord may not mean that. Yeah, like for example, the Pandavas, they are also very great devotees, basically like Prahlad, you could say. But the Pandavas, I mean, not that they were killed, but they were certainly severely mistreated for many years. And so I'm sure you know the stories. They were banished. They were cheated of the kingdom which they should rule, not just because having a kingdom is nice, but because they would actually rule it properly. But they were cheated at least for many years. So someone who feels that being protected by the Lord means that, practically any situation that you encounter which has negative aspects to it, they should have been protected. They should have been protected from losing their kingdom. They got it back in the end by Krishna's arrangement, but initially they lost it. And they lost so much they lost. Of course, eventually they got it back, but all these different things happened, which, if your idea of being protected by the Lord is that, whatever the situation is, the Lord just turns it around and you get saved from it. It just didn't happen. And why is that? Well, Prabhupada explains it's because we have to learn, or they're demonstrating the attitudes, the consciousness of devotees who are facing such problems. And not that just at every step, every problem was solved by the Lord. Another example, of course, very good example, important example, is Sita. Sita Devi is the eternal consort of the Lord, not on the same level as Srimati Radharani, but on a very high level. But see what happened to her. She was just inconvenienced and much worse, in terrible ways. And of course, eventually the Lord did save her, but immediately she wasn't saved. She was kidnapped and mistreated severely. So those who feel that protection from the Lord means every time and just immediately the problems are just solved totally by the Lord, they don't really understand how the Lord works. In regard to Sita, one point is that how she was being every day Ravana would come to her and demand, you surrender to me and become one. He had so many wives, become one of his wives. And she was completely refusing, till eventually, Ravana was a Rakshasa, means, among other things, a cannibal. Eventually, day after day, he's insisting, she's refusing. Eventually, he says, look, you refuse again, and I will eat you for breakfast. And he actually was going to eat her for breakfast. But she still refused. So in this way, we see an example of a devotee, steadfast devotee, despite the challenges. And rather than just the challenges being resolved just on the spot, immediately, it definitely didn't happen for the Pandavas. They were exiled for, 14 years or so? And it definitely didn't happen with Sita. So being protected by the Lord is not quite as simple as just, as soon as there's a problem, the Lord just, so to speak, zaps it. Just like that, problem is gone. Problem just appeared, bang, it's not there any longer. And that's what protection by the Lord means. But even sometimes the devotees lose their lives. But the understanding is, of course, they may go back to Godhead, or in some cases, their immediate situation may have detrimental aspects to it, and they may need to go through another lifetime in which those detrimental things are not there, and then they can progress better in Krishna consciousness. So, like Prithu Maharaj, that the pure devotee, the verse says, is completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and while discharging devotional service, must hear, read, and induce others to hear about the character and life of Prithu Maharaj. Because Prithu Maharaj is such an extraordinary example of a devotee, and his way of living was so extraordinary and so exemplary in many ways for other devotees to hear about. And therefore, and his activities involved ruling. It should be seen and understood how he ruled, how he had them educated, even how he developed the state economically, and how he fought against enemies, how he performed different sacrifices and religious ceremonies. Everyone should, all devotees should or must hear about these things and learn from them and apply those points which are learned. So therefore, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, thus it is recommended for the sahajya, or the neophyte devotee. You know, it's, of course, debatable. Is the neophyte devotee necessarily a sahajya? It sounds to me more like two categories. It's recommended if someone's a sahajya, but it's also recommended if someone is just a neophyte devotee, to hear and chant, and to get others to hear and chant about Prithu Maharaj. And Prabhupada says, even though one may think himself to be in the transcendental position of advanced devotional service, you know, it's arguable. Well, it's arguable that, anyway, it's arguable that someone who thinks he's in an advanced position, anyway, if someone thinks they're in an advanced position, but they're not really, then they should definitely hear about Prithu Maharaj and all these different things, how he applied Krishna consciousness in all these different situations as a king, as a ruler. But even someone who is actually in a transcendental position, who is actually on that level, should also hear about, must also hear about and chant and get others to hear about these same activities of Maharaj Prithu. It's extremely important. And to be very selective about what one studies, particularly with this idea of we must get the conjugal pastimes because they're the highest. This is a misconception, and it's an unwanted thing, an unhelpful thing, and actually a detrimental type of thing. So there you go, devotees. I don't think any of you have this problem, but it's something we should regularly inform people about, because due to the influence of certain people spread these types of ideas that you must focus on the very highest things, they're confused. They're confused, and it is not good for them to stay in that type of condition. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Any comments, questions, words of wisdom? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I had a question and a comment. The question is, Prabhupada does offer overwhelmingly, in so many places, the caution of jumping to the very intimate pastimes. And though there may be some devotees after decades of sincere practice and purification may actually be qualified to enter into hearing and discussing these pastimes, how are they guided? How are they encouraged? Because practically throughout Prabhupada's books, there's just the caution aspect given. I mean, there are some places where there's encouragement, but for the most part, I feel our movement is focused on be careful, beware, but for those devotees who may be, qualified, how do they get encouraged and guided in this way?
Yes, well, they should get some guidance, good idea, particularly from their spiritual master or, some very senior devotee. That's there. But, well, one would assume that guidance would include that not to start like just going into it full time, but in the general context of Krishna consciousness. And, understanding Prabhupada's, his general sort of drift, recognizing that, then they should appreciate that I should follow the general drift in general. But, under certain circumstances, like when these subjects come up, then we can study them and also try to explain them in ways to help other devotees. Because Prabhupada did not say, what was it? We don't want to, not ban, was the word ban, or something like that, ban the gopis, or there was another word. Boycott. I think boycott. Yeah, we don't want to boycott them, but to sort of zoom in and in and in on like a real ongoing basis. Prabhupada definitely didn't encourage that. So, but devotees need help to understand these things, because otherwise they can be, can create difficulties. So those who are more qualified, when the need arises or when it seems appropriate, they can help with giving understanding of those things. But even like Rupa Goswami, Srila Rupa Goswami, he was qualified. But he gave Sanatana Goswami, they focused generally in the sort of the broader sense. But then there are places where they elaborate on these things. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree, Maharaj. And also we find that these devotees who are actually qualified, they never advertise their knowledge of these things. It's just not their habit to do that.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very important. They never do that.
Like I was thinking about this one anecdote with Srila Prabhupada in Madras, where he was staying in the house of a businessman, Mr. Balu. He's a very interesting character. He had this kind of very interesting familiar relationship with his beautiful Radha Krishna deities. When Prabhupada asked him once, why do you always dress your deities in black? He says, because Swamiji, they are so effulgent that if I don't dress them in black, I wouldn't be able to see them, you know. And then Prabhupada noticed that he and his wife wouldn't offer obeisances to his deity, and he asked why, and he said, well, you know, they are my children, how can the parent offer obeisances to the children?
Right.
But the point is, you know, he had this familiar tendency with Krishna, but so one evening he and his wife approached Prabhupada and said, Swamiji, can you please recite Rasa Leela to us? And Prabhupada tried to deflect the whole thing, and eventually Prabhupada said, you know, to hear these pastimes, one has to be free from material attachments to home, family, wife, money. But this man kept insisting, Swamiji, we are very keen, we are qualified. And then Prabhupada finally said, well, okay, you may be very qualified to hear, but for me, I do not feel myself qualified to speak it. So
Yes.
Prabhupada had that approach, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I would just like to add regarding the Nrsimha Dev film. When we were little kids, real small, and there was this Telugu version of the film, and it was very, very exciting. Because we in the Sri Sampradaya have always told us about Lord Nrsimha Deva. And one thing I must say, the reason why I'm here is to say thank you to Krishna for many rescue he has done on me, just like Prahlad Maharaj. I'm just going to mention just one of many. When I was 18 years old, we were playing cards in the lounge, the boys, and my mum was in the kitchen. And there was this early spring thunder, electric storm. And there was this loud thunder where we all rocked in our socks. And I immediately, instinctively, I went to protect my mother. And upon seeing her, bolt of lightning approaching her, the moment it saw me, retracted. So I remember that very clearly, and I would say, thank you, Lord. This is what I'm here, by the way. One of the reasons. Yeah.
Okay, right, good. Yeah, sometimes Krishna definitely protects his devotees, even sort of regular devotees, not on the level of Prahlad, from deadly situations, no doubt. And that's encouraging.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. No, okay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.